Resilience is key to happy childhood and also into adulthood. This begins with the development of a healthy brainstem. We know that infants who receive a good enough parenting will have developed attachment to main caregivers and having had their basic needs met. For example, crying has resulted in them being fed, their nappy being changed, being comforted when they're distressed, and provided with social interactions that have been nurturing and in the main positive. These will ensure the necessary building blocks will enable the most primitive part of our brains, the brainstem, to develop normally. This most primitive part of an infant's brain has learned through experience of love and positive attachment to the primary caregiver. This adult meets their basic survival and safety needs. The primitive brain lies dormant until we, at any stage in our life, face a situation of threat, and then it springs to life, triggering the safety valve, and we either fight, flight, or freeze as a way of managing a situation of threat. The primitive brain is the most important part of the brain, but the limbic and cortical systems also need to develop. The limbic system is part of the growing and developing brain and enables the child to develop relationships with others. It supports the development of emotions, self-regulation, empathy, and it supports the development of social skills. So by the age of 3, a child who has not experienced adversity will be able, in general, to take turns, to interact positively with other children and recognise basic emotions in others, such as anger. They can also recognise their own feelings and name these. They can verbalise happiness, and they can recognise facial expressions such as smiling as a way to show that happiness. The limbic system enables the development of self-worth, self-esteem and confidence to take place. A healthy limbic system, therefore, is crucial for all human beings as it enables us to form and sustain positive relationships with others, and it helps us to manage the knocks that life throws at us. Resilience is formed in the limbic system. And around the limbic system grows the outer shell of the brain, the biggest area of the brain, and it's the cortical system. And this is where higher order thinking skills develop, such as an ability to hypothesize, to justify, to learn successfully, and to manage academic challenges. And it's a very sophisticated area. The limbic and cortical systems in a healthy brain keep the primitive brain in check. It provides the ability to reason in the face of any perceived or real threat. But what happens to the development of a brain if a child is impacted by trauma, abuse, loss or neglect for an experienced, difficult and prolonged time? It is crucial to point out that if an infant experiences 1 or 2 occasions of neglect, there won't be any long-lasting impact. However, the degree of adverse brain development is dependent on the duration and the severity of the abuse or neglect experienced by the infant. Neglect or abuse by the primary caregiver in the child's earliest of years results in an underdevelopment of the brain. The primitive brain, therefore, remains on high alert. The child is unable to trust the primary caregiver will meet their needs. They don't understand the primary caregiver will keep them safe. They have no experience of that. A lack of nurture, love and attachment impairs the limbic system and the cortical system, and therefore an infant does not acquire the building blocks that are required. The limbic and cortical systems remain undernourished and the lack of neurons required to develop in a healthy way. So what behaviours do we see when a child has an underdeveloped limbic and cortical system? As earlier mentioned, by the age of 3, a child who's unaffected by trauma, hasn't experienced abuse, will be able to take turns, to socialise appropriately, to recognise their own basic emotions and those of others. They can cooperate, they can have confidence to explore their world, and they have growing self-esteem as their limbic system is healthy. They can also have, by that point, a healthy cortical system. They have no fear of learning, and they can manage change, and they can concentrate for a period of time. And if difficulties do arrive, they have fledgling resilience and they can better manage the challenges. A child who has been affected by trauma by the age of 3 is hypervigilant, looking for threat as their primitive brains have remained as the dominant force. They find concentrating hard. They have very little social skills. They do not empathise with others and they cannot recognise their own feelings or express these. These children can be angry, get upset very easily, and they can lash out, unable to manage the environment in which they're in. They may be the same age as their peers in a nursery chronologically, but developmentally they behave as a much younger child. They can also be clingy and fearful, not wishing to explore, and their language skills can be underdeveloped as the impact of trauma has affected the cortical system where the building blocks for learning is developed. So how do we support a child affected by trauma or loss or abuse in any of the settings you find yourself working in? Well, the most important aspect of meeting needs is to recognise that these children are not bad or sad or mad, but they have a difficulty, and we need to recognise that their behaviour that's being displayed is a cry for help. We need to recognise a child's primitive brain is constantly sending messages because they feel unsafe. As practitioners, we should recognise that children affected by trauma have not met the same milestones developmentally, and we shouldn't expect them to be able to manage in an early years environment in the same way as children unaffected by trauma. It's vital to point out that as safe adults, we have an incredibly important role to fulfil. We need to build relationships with children so they recognise that we are the adults who can be trusted. Relationships are key. Therefore, in meeting needs, we need to attend to the primitive brain and create an environment that feels safe. We must find a time to support children, ensuring that we are the trusted adult, always in close proximity to the child, scaffolding their learning and supporting their interactions with others. We need to be the role models and behaviour which a safe adult demonstrates. We shouldn't blame or shame or judge these children, and we must be patient and understand the need that underlies the behaviour. Then we will find it much easier not to take the challenging behaviour personally. We need to be able to recreate opportunities for the basic needs to be met so the limbic and cortical systems can begin to develop. And that is why there's been the rise of nurture rooms where early years experiences can be recreated, and this is vital. We need to teach turn taking, support children to recognise their own emotions and name these, matching words to facial expressions. And we shouldn't shame or blame children for being unable to manage the way their peers can. So as a practitioner, we must recognise our own values. Be kind to ourselves, because teaching or supporting a child affected by trauma can be tiring. We need a team approach and clear plans to develop these skills such as emotions management, social skills and self-regulation. But it's a message of hope. With time and patience, these children will thrive. These children that are affected by trauma can heal from the past and go on to live positive lives. But it's us as professionals must be aware of their needs, recognise their triggers and de-escalate using strategies such as breathing and relaxations. And that is the way forward to support these children. It's our role, it's our responsibility.